side of it, but let's see what Peter has on his mind right now.
Yeah, I just had a question. So, what's the youngest athlete you work with? Like what age? What age group?
I prefer, Peter, I prefer to work with people 13 and up. If you're working with younger athletes, they don't have the same maturity or the same level of emotional management. But I certainly have worked with younger athletes. I remember a woman phoned me up and she said, "My son is a really good golfer, but he gets emotional. Is that something you could help him with?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what I do." And then she told me he was 6 years old. And every time he made a bad shot, he got upset. And sometimes he cried or he threw his club. And the other side of it was when he was playing with another kid and the other kid made a bad shot, he got really happy. So I worked with both him and his mother together. And, you keep it simple. One of the keys in what I do, I work a lot with breathing. I mean, breathing is a key to emotional control. It's a key to having being in the moment. I always tell athletes when we worry, we're into the future. We're worrying about something. When we're frustrated or disappointed, it's the past. But the game is now. How do I get into the now, this breath? So I work with breathing, but with kids, little kid, you can just take a breath. Okay, let's just take a breath, calm down, see the shot you want to make if we're talking golf. So, I think there's some things you can do. I've had goalies who are 10 years old and getting very emotional. And again, there's some things that you can do, but I prefer to work with 12 and up, 13 and up.
Yeah, I asked the question too because when I was I coached at a prep school too for about a dozen years, and we would go out and talk and have little conferences with parents and kids. Maybe go to a hockey camp over the summer and talk about prep school and try to introduce them to that. And the thing that was really interesting was, and I don't know if you ever run across this, or maybe it just happenstance. So if the kids are around 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, pee-wee age, they ask a million questions. Like they want to know everything. I had one kid ask, "Can you have a carpet in your dorm room?" Yes, you can have a carpet. Then your next group comes in and they're bantams, which are 13, 14-year-olds. And you give your presentation and then you ask if there's any questions. And the first thing they do is they look left, they look right, then they look behind them to see if anybody else is going to raise their hand and ask a question. So it's incredible from that essentially 1 or 2 year age bracket where they're more concerned with what the boy or girl next to them are going to think about them than actually trying to get something out of the whole conversation. I just always found that fascinating.
Well, I think it's very interesting because if I'm speaking to young groups like Bantam age players, I would often say to the team that's asking me to speak to them, it's good to have the parents there and have the parents sitting in the back because the parents will ask questions and they get the thing going. And yeah, often the kids don't. I find that if it was like you go a little older, like 15, 16, and you're talking to boys, sometimes they're sitting like like a little stoned, and you're talking to girls and they're taking notes. The girls are much more, I found, attentive to the talk than the boys.
Yeah, much more focused. There's no I have a son and a daughter, and I can attest to that.
Yeah. So I have one funny story. It has nothing to do with sports psychology, but I was reminded when I said I was working with this psychiatrist doing research, the one who wanted me to write papers that basically his mother would understand. I would interview patients for him, and I would do some research projects and write reports. Anyway, I was working in a hospital. This was during the summer, and I sometimes at that point, I was probably 23, 24. I would have a large lunch and I'd get tired, I'd get sleepy. And I guess probably was eating too much at lunch. But nevertheless, one time I had this phenomenon. I went back to my office and I closed the door and I put my head down on the desk and I had a quick nap, and there was a knock at the door, and I, got up and straightened my tie and went to open the door, and it was a psychiatrist with this patient he wanted me to interview. And he looked at me and he said, "What happened to your head?" I had fallen asleep on my wristwatch, and I had this mark. Really incriminating moment, Anyway, it has nothing to do with sports psychology.
Listen, I'm not related to sports psychology, but maybe it is. I'm not sure if you've heard of Claire Drake. I'm sure you have in Canada. Sure. Claire was famous for power snoozes. I've sat in presentations, and he was to present, and he was napping and dozing off. And at the same time, he was writing his presentation on defensive zone coverage. And when it was his turn, it was the most brilliant presentation I've ever seen. So I don't know whether the power snooze helped you or not, but I'm really curious. The one question I have here now, related to that, a psychiatrist came in to have you talk to a patient. And that's sort of like La La Land, academic land. You know what I mean? People get frightened, psychiatry. And yet they came to you with a simple approach.
Well, I got to clarify that. I mean, he was doing research, and there was a certain protocol. There was a certain series of questions that he wanted all of his psychiatric subjects to go through, so that any procedures, you had some data on people before they participated in the actual study. So it wasn't like I was doing his work. I was just running through this protocol that he had, which was great experience for a young person, but it was he was still the man. I mean, that was, but let's get into talking